I'm Becky McCoy, and you're listening to Stories of Unfolding Grace, the podcast about grace during unexpected times. You'll hear from real people dealing with hard stuff, and I hope you'll feel encouraged that you can bravely live through hard stuff too. In this episode, I'm talking with Molly Giannattasio, who happens to be my sister, about an injury that almost ended her collegiate volleyball career and how this injury changed the way she dealt with adversity. So I'm here with Molly, my sister, and we are going to talk about a time in her life that was pretty difficult in a lot of different ways, but she was able to get through it. Now she can look back and see how grace showed up. So, Molly, would you like to tell us about this difficult season? What happened?
So, I played volleyball at Springfield College, and I was actually a part of the program for 5 years. Usually you only get 4 years of eligibility. Going into my senior season, I trained really hard and was very prepared for the season, and then about 2 weeks into the season, the regular season, I fractured my wrist. So it was completely out of the blue, really actually random. One of my teammates kind of went up and took like a half-speed roll shot, so really not hard at all, and I extended for the ball, and it kind of hit the side of my hand, and I heard the crack, and I knew that was going to be my season-ending injury my senior year. And
just total freak accident.
Yeah.
Nothing you could have done to...
When I described it to people, they were like, wait, what? Like, that really happened? And I was like, yeah. One of my friends was like, wow, you are, like, really unlucky. It was... Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, so weird. So weird.
Yeah.
So, to go back to fill in a little bit about why you reacted the way that you did. Tell us about the few seasons before that and why this became so difficult on top of being an injury.
Right. I think if this was kind of the single big event of my career, it would have been very difficult, but I would have handled it very differently. So going back to the beginning, my freshman year, we had an unprecedented season at Springfield College. We went to the Elite Eight, had 2 freshman setters, and which is, again, just unheard of for a team to go that far with such young people on the team. And then sophomore year, my dad was diagnosed with cancer a couple weeks. Well, I keep forgetting. Yeah, I get like on interview mode.
Yeah, she's on interview mode, people. It's okay.
So Dad was diagnosed, and he actually passed away right about the end of our regular season. So his illness mirrored our season, my sophomore year, and it was just terrible. It was a terrible awful timing. Thankful I had the teammates I had, and so that was just a hard year. When I think about that year, I don't really think about playing the sport. I just think about my teammates upholding me.
Yeah.
So after that season, just mentally, emotionally tried to get back on track, but come time for junior year that season, I just was nowhere near ready to be able to play, just because it was a year later, and Dad's sickness really just reflected the season of when he got sick and when he passed away. It was just too much, and mentally, emotionally was just, oh my gosh, like physical flashbacks, that just the anxiety, and I've never really had a panic attack, but those were like some of the closest moments, and just really depressed and angry. I was very, very angry. So my teammates could tell you a few stories about that one. So going into senior year, the summer before season started, I trained like I've never trained before,
Yeah,
6
you
days
were
a
in
week.
beast mode.
I was.
Yeah.
And the only reason I took the 7th day off is because I knew my body needed it. And that was the only reason. You know, I'd even drink chocolate milk after every single workout. So you can't say my calcium was low. But it was different than the past years I had trained, because in the past years I trained for myself. And I can tell you that every single rep summer going into senior year was for my teammates. And I wanted to put myself to be in the best position I could be, to support them. And I knew that meant by being mentally, emotionally, physically healthy. So I was also in the Word pretty regularly. And I was just feeling very confident in who God made me to be. But there was one day over the summer when I turned to my mom and I was like, Mom, I'm going to get injured this season. And she was like,
oh, and you never told me this.
Yeah. And she was like, what? Like, how do you know that? I was like, I just know it. And I was convinced it was going to be an ACL, because that runs in the family. And so I trained even harder. And Pilates, that's a great injury prevention workout. So I did that. I did TRX and ran and also stretched and really, really took care of my body. Finally, we get into senior year, and I am mentally and emotionally better than I had been my whole career, let alone physically ready. So I fractured my wrist on a Wednesday. The night before, we just had come off of a really bad loss to Coast Guard, and coach had given us quite the pump-up speech before practice. So we were all going at it and pretty relentless. And then I made that dive, and it snapped. And I knew right away, but I didn't tell anybody. So they threw some ice on it, which of course made it hurt worse. But I took the ice and I went back and I actually started shagging balls, like picking up balls for my teammates while they continued to play. Meanwhile, my wrist was practically dangling.
Yeah.
And, so they always make fun of me for that. Just the way I got up off the court and just casually walked off. And that was that.
So
afterwards,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say afterwards, it took me a while to get over the shock for sure. I remember that first night, I didn't really sleep and was just like, okay, well, I sort of saw this one coming, but not really. My initial reaction was, this has to be for good. And I remember saying that to myself so many times, like, this has to be for good, somehow, some way. So I know God had prepared me for that moment.
You wanted it. You were determined that this injury would turn out to be for good. Like, you weren't going to waste it. Did that make it easy? Like, did you still struggle? How did you?
Well,
she laughs.
to sum that one up, one of my friends, it was probably so I had the cast on for 6 weeks. So it was probably about 3 weeks into it. She goes, do you even care that you can't play? And I was like, yeah, of course I care. I cried many, many times, and I was very angry. But I think, and it's not always good to keep those emotions behind closed doors, but I chose to, because I wanted the team was first. I wanted to put the team first. And again, I knew that somehow, some way it would be for good. And I don't know that I know that answer. I don't think I ever will find out how it turned out for good. But yeah.
What was the hardest part of that season? Like, especially when you had if you divide it into when you had the cast on, when you had the cast off and you were starting to do PT, what was it like emotionally during those seasons?
It was frustrating. With the cast on, it was a physical reminder of almost all that I'd lost. Because people can be funny, and after you go through something difficult, they say that you deserve things. And so, or that you didn't deserve things. So, for example, when I broke my wrist, lost my senior season, people are like, oh, you didn't deserve this. You don't deserve this. Or, all of a sudden It's like, oh, well, you've been through so much, you deserve to be happy.
Right.
And, so that was, I think I let that get to my head a little bit. And so it was almost as though the longer I had that cast on, the foggier my vision became, and I lost sight of the good.
Interesting.
So it was actually almost a backwards experience, because most times in my life I've experienced something tragic has happened, and I get really angry about it at first. And then, I kind of take the scales off and I'm able to sort of see more clearly things for what they are. But this was a little more backwards. It was at first, okay, you broke your wrist. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to handle this? But it was almost like I lost that determination. And then I finally get the cast off and I go, PT wasn't too bad. I mean, for anybody who's had a wrist fracture without surgery, there's not a whole lot. It's just getting back your range of motion and stretching and all of that, re-strengthening. But it wasn't
She's
grueling.
An occupational therapy major, so she gets...
So that was different for me, that backwards sort of experience. And once I got the cast off, that might have been even harder, because then I didn't have the physical reminder that I couldn't play. It was just like the ATs, the athletic trainers being like, you can't play. And I knew that, but somehow the injury just it definitely threw me for a loop. So the day after I got my cast off is the day Keith, my brother-in-law, was diagnosed. So my cast had a weird sort of...
And by your brother-in-law, you mean Keith.
Your husband.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just so that people aren't losing track of all of the...
Yeah. I know. Those connections. So...
yeah, it was a lot all at once. It was another sucky fall.
For sure. And in one that I sort of knew was coming. Didn't want to happen, obviously.
Yeah, who wants to break their wrist? Nobody.
Right.
Choosing to live bravely and authentically is important to me, and I'm guessing it's something you are interested in too. You can learn more about my story at my blog, BeckyLMcCoy.com. Stop by and sign up to receive my monthly newsletter. It includes all sorts of interesting tidbits and family updates. Check the show notes for details. Hey, I'd love your help with something. If you're enjoying Stories of Unfolding Grace, please share it with your friends and subscribe in iTunes. If you leave a rating, it'll help other listeners to find the podcast. Thanks so much for being on this journey with me. So how did you see grace? So if we're defining grace just as surprisingly good things that happen in the midst of really difficult things.
This is actually a really cool experience in my life, because I didn't see the grace until the following season. So it was my 5th season, kind of a bonus year. So like I had said, my senior season just ended pretty poorly. It was a big letdown for sure, even if I hadn't have had an injury. I definitely struggled with that ending, but then I had to decide if I wanted to play again. And except for freshman year, every season had held really tragic times, and really the seasons had been some of the hardest times of my life for sure. So I was like, I don't know if I want to put myself through that again. What
if something happens again?
What if I decide to play again and I'm let down one more time, like 4th time's the charm? No, thank you. So it took me a long time, and that was also on top of Keith passing away. Right. So it was just a lot. And spring semester senior year, for anybody remembers those times. So anyways, it took a lot of counseling from a lot of different people and a lot of praying. And I don't think I ever really got a definitive answer.
No, you definitely wrestled with it a lot.
I mean, because we had a spring season, and I sort of started playing with them during the spring season, and all of a sudden it was like, I have one more shot to play all out and totally all out for God, and I'm not going to take it. It felt like I wasn't comfortable with that choice, and I knew that being a fifth year player,
and that would be during a grad school semester,
right? But being a fifth year player, I didn't even want to be captain, because I'd been captain for 2 years, and it was a lot. And I knew that going back for a fifth year had nothing to do with the sport, had nothing to do with the game. Someone had told me that I have a lot to offer as a fifth year, who had been through so much, both on and off the court, and had been with some very successful teams and some unsuccessful teams, and just had a lot of wisdom. So all of a sudden it was like, yeah, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to play because I have something to offer besides just my skills. And so once it became playing for the well-being of my teammates and hoping to build into them more, it was like, go, hands down, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. It's so cool.
So, and that's what the fifth season was. It was, this sounds terrible, but like, when I think about it, I don't really remember how we did. Like, and now that I'm thinking about it, we did very well.
Yeah,
it was,
you did.
Aside from my freshman years, that was our second best season.
Yep.
And so obviously that was a blessing. Yeah. So I had a bookend career, but so obviously that was a lot of fun to be that successful. But at the same time, it was just the little ways I could be a light.
Yeah.
And because I hadn't done that since probably freshman year, just because the way life went, and maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit, but
no,
this year
to be distracted by. Yeah. So
just a little.
Yeah.
So
how because of breaking your wrist at the beginning of your senior season, how did you learn to live bravely and authentically as a result? Or have you not? Like, how has it affected how you live?
I think it was a huge turning point in my life, actually, which sounds kind of funny because in my mind, a wrist fracture is nothing. It was just a major mindset change in who God is. All of a sudden, well, before I broke my wrist, he was a God who would let bad things happen, and kind of that cliche, like, I was really angry at God when Dad was sick and died. And I was almost angry when good things came out of it, as terrible as that sounds.
Yeah.
It was like, well, my dad is dead because of that,
Right. No, that makes sense.
Also,
been there.
It's also being young too, but
because you're how old when Dad died?
19. So, and it, first big loss. Anyways, my view of God after that was just not correct. It wasn't right, and it wasn't what he's showed of himself. And that wasn't from him, that was from me. That was me just not seeing clearly and not choosing to see clearly. So after I broke my wrist, it was that deep knowledge I had never had before, but that deep knowledge that God continued to reiterate that this is for good. You might not see it, you might not ever know how, but this is for good. And just the opportunities I had that season, looking back, were pretty incredible because I couldn't play. I had more time to put my energies and my teammates into other things.
Yeah.
And then it definitely changed my image of God and that he is a good God.
That's cool. So if someone at the beginning of their senior season, or even any season in college, a collegiate athlete came up to you and just had an injury that had ended that season, they weren't sure if they were ever going to be able to play again, or, you know, all these similar things were happening in their life, how would you encourage them to handle it similarly, differently?
That's a tricky question because every person is just so different. It's also something I've learned is words of wisdom are great, but unless the person has willing ears to listen and to take it in, it's not really worth a whole lot. So, I don't know, I'm a one-on-one person, so it really depends on who they are. But I would just say to keep the big picture in mind. And I think, you know, once I got my cast off and I started losing the big picture, and all of a sudden I started focusing on me. And all of a sudden it was about, well, you know, my dad died, and then my brother-in-law is sick, like, and you know, and on top of that, I had a season-ending injury. Like, why don't, you know, like, it was all about me. And so I would just say, continue to focus on those around you. And I've learned that giving is just, it's the perfect antidote to that selfishness. And it doesn't
I'm writing that down.
mean you can't be
That was a good one.
angry. Like, you have to be angry.
Right.
Thanks. You know, like, come out sometimes. And, you know, you have to be angry, you have to be sad. And one thing I would have done differently is I would have showed people how upset I really was. You know, I put on the brave face. My people who knew me well definitely knew. But that's definitely, I would have let them help me more.
That's good. Those are good tips. So much wisdom. Okay, now the fun part. You ready?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. So what are you loving right now? What do you want to tell everybody all about?
Oh, what am I loving right now? That's a great question. Because just last week I realized I am not fun right now, and I need to be more fun. So that's a really good question. Right now, I think I'm trying to say yes more. I'm the type of person that says no a lot because I like my introverted space.
Yes. I hear you on that one. So you're loving yes.
But I'm learning that saying yes is really, well, can be really fun. I've also learned the hard way that it's also not smart to say yes all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your favorite food right now? What are you enjoying eating?
Oh, my favorite food. Well, that's tough because, you know, I'm actually I have a few challenges going on right now that I've created for myself. And so I have my February food challenge, and that includes eating no ice cream. So usually ice cream's my go-to, but I can't use that right now. So, well, last night was the Super Bowl, and I had to say I'm putting hot sauce on everything.
Oh, love hot sauce. Yep.
So I think that's my go-to right now.
Awesome. Okay, these are slightly more serious questions. What are you doing to take care of yourself?
Well, along with my February food challenge, I have my cardio challenge.
Look at you.
I know. That's actually a difficult area, though, because that can turn into not taking care of myself kind of quickly. So, but that's one way I'm physically, because I sleep better at night, and I feel like I'm drawn to eating better and when I'm actually working out. Yeah,
and since you don't have volleyball to kind of organize that, you organized it yourself. Well done. Okay, last question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Last question. What are you doing to be brave?
This is kind of nerdy, but I just watched a documentary on the Roosevelts, and Teddy Roosevelt he went through some difficult times in life, so he was always prone to depression. And one thing his father always told him was to take action. So right now I have that on a sticky note on my wall. So every morning I see that, and it says take action. Another quote I heard not too long after that was, idleness is a gateway to depression. So between the two of those quotes, which kind of go hand in hand, I'm being brave by taking action and initiating things with people, and going to the gym even when I would maybe rather lay in bed. Yeah, just trying to get involved and going after certain things instead of being idle is one way I'm being brave.
You go, girl. Rock on. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing a lot of things that have been really difficult. I know. I appreciate it. And I'm sure there are other people who can identify with those things too. Next week, I talk with Heather Bender about an unplanned pregnancy and how it changed the course of her life.
Without going into a whole lot of detail, basically, I was out with a bunch of people. I think somebody at some point gave me a date rape rub. After a few months, one of my coworkers pulled me aside and said, "Are you pregnant?" And I looked at her and went, "No, I'm just gaining weight, and I'm kind of offended that you would even ask." I mean, opportunities and grace and even miracles, they happen.
If you're interested in sharing your story of unfolding grace, head to my blog, beckylmccoy.com, and click on the submissions button. I can't wait to hear from you. Thanks again for joining me. I'm really looking forward to next week.